This piece of plastic is a hull of a World War II era German tank, Panzerkampfwagen II, complete with a torsion bar suspension. It's the very beginning of my effort to design and 3D print a complete tank from scratch, and at the same time a continuation of my previous project where I made a Raspberry Pi controlled tank. Have a look at it if you didn't, because I'm going to reuse the software I did for it in here, so the basic principle that the tank creates its own Wi-Fi network, you connect to it and then visit the HTTP server hosted on the tank to access joysticks, it's the same. But how did I get in here? Well, initially I didn't think of recreating the whole tank. I got myself a 3D printer with a plan of making a second iteration of my tank project, but what was initially on my mind to create a hybrid of a model kit. You know, an ordinary model kit from the model store with 3D printed elements of my design. But what elements? I focused on a single thing in particular. The torsion bars. I really wanted to make a working suspension with wheels bouncing up and down on each obstacle. This hypnotizing movement had me the very first time I've seen it, and I really wanted to recreate it. So I bought a Tamiya Panzer II, 1:35 scale. The existing torsion bars were fixed, a single piece of plastic connected to the hull, but it was not a problem for my sturdy, cheap Chinese no-name engraver, the exact type of device safety glasses were designed for, so I got them off. In time-lapse it looks like playing with Play-Doh, and it kinda was. The effect was far from tidy, but I reckoned I could hide this with modeling putty. Now, the time was to do the 3D design. I took a side picture of the whole thing and started to model of it in Blender. And I know I probably should have used some CAD software license, got the better of me, and I used the stuff I'm at least remotely familiar with. Once I had something resembling a torsion bar, I put it into the slicer. Slicer is the kind of software that takes your 3D model as an input and outputs a file with instructions specific for your 3D printer, such as move your servo on this axis, so and so, effectively being a roadmap to print your model. The tricky part was to match the scale, since the scale in Blender is arbitrary, and yes, you can pick your own scale in Blender to match the metric scale, and even if you don't, Slicer tells you the expected dimensions of your print and allows to scale it, but in the end, small corrections by trial and error were necessary to make the printed part exactly match dimensions of the original one. Anyway, how was my torsion bar going to work? Well, it must bend, that's the principle. Turns out there are many kinds of filaments, some of them are elastic like a rubber band, there's even a hardness scale for that, so I designed my torsion bar in a way I could print the bending part with a different filament and then connect both of them. Okay, I printed the torsion bars, I painted them in a metallic paint and glued them inside the model, and result was hideous. Really, what did I expect after sewing the shit off the model and sloppily applying a modeling putty? The good part is it proved to work, and at this point a new concept started to grow, fertilized by the crop, which was my original attempt. How about 3D printing more than a torsion bar, a complete hull and the torsion bars? Theoretically, I could even print the whole tank out of the thin air, the trade-off being how much time am I willing to spend on the modeling. After all, I could not take just any regular Panzer II model from the internet and print it. It needs moving parts and just in general a design that reckons the technical limitations of a 3D printer. Secondly, a mid-range PLA printer such as mine will have trouble matching the quality of a model kit. Maybe this low quality could be obscured with a nice post-processing done by a professional modeler, but not by myself. So I asked myself a simple question: is making a whole tank complete with tracks, because remember the elastic filament, is it absolutely cool to have it done out of thin air? Yes. The hull has a pretty dull geometric shape, so modeling it was rainbows and sunshines. The unpleasant part being it took 6.5 hours to print it, and guess what? It failed twice, somewhere in the middle. You can imagine I started babysitting the printer. But this whole experience gave me an idea. For the third time I made a design change, making the whole modular. I put small rails on the sides, so then when I want to add some module, like a gearbox or a casing with Raspberry Pi, I could just print it separately and slide it in, without repeating the whole hull. There's more. With this modular design, the tank scales much better. If someone wants to make it 1:16 instead of 1:35, because I'm going to open source the design free of charge, he just applies the scale and only redesigns the modules inside to better fit the electronics. Needless to say, with modular design, it's easier to replace electronics or assemble a tank out of something different than Raspberry. And now, time for some juicy time lapses and slow-mos.